What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another video from the 10-7 MMA channel. And this video is about the most exciting matchup of the entire year, maybe even the decade, in my opinion. DDP versus Khamzat going down August 16th at UFC 319 in Chicago. Cannot wait for that fight. Now, as I've been listening to anyone and everyone talk about this fight and the matchup and how they predict it, it's always the same thing, which is so annoying because it's not really a prediction. They're like, if it ends early, it's going to be Khamzat, but if it goes to later rounds and Dricus can get him into deep waters, then it's going to be DDP's advantage and victory. It's like, well, you're not really predicting anything. You're saying it could go to either person. It's just really annoying. And there hasn't been good technical breakdown of the two fighting styles, in my opinion, to really understand what this fight is about. Now, of course, I'll admit right off the bat, even though DDP, I would argue, is my second favorite fighter in the middleweight division, Khamzat is my favorite fighter in the UFC period. So I want to start and give that caveat right off the bat. But I do think, regardless, the Weasle gives a really good explanation and breakdown, in my opinion, of why this fight is going to go to Khamzat and why he will be the more dominant fighter given this matchup stylistically. So we're going to go through a couple of key points. Watch the full video. I'll post the link in the description. Watch the full video if you have time. It's about 16 minutes for Weasle's video. But my objective here is to break down key points, kind of highlight them so you can see step by step what the Weasle is pointing out in terms of, in my opinion, why I think Khamzat has just so many avenues to victory. And he does so by looking through the lens of previous fights, in particular fights against wrestlers. So the big wrestler that he fought in 2023 was Derek Brunson, but Robert Whittaker has some good wrestling game. He actually shot a takedown. And Darren Till, I know he's traditionally known as a striker, but you'll see why some footage from that fight is also relevant. Again, take all of this with a grain of salt, as these fights are from 2022 and or 2023. I'm sure Dricus has improved since then. I'm sure Khamzat has improved as well, even since his last fight against Robert Whittaker. So we have to take all these things with a grain of salt and bear those time lapses, give those consideration. But that being said, let's get into the mix. So we're going to start right off the bat with just an interesting tidbit from the Weasle talking about the absolute level of domination that we see exhibited from Khamzat Chimaev again and again.
From solid takedown defense and get-ups to taking himself to the ground, Dricus Du Plessis' takedown defense is all over the place, and it's going to need to be on point when he fights Khamzat Chimaev, by far the best wrestler he's ever faced. In fact, Dricus actually doesn't fight a lot of wrestlers. He's a champion with 2 title defenses, but he's only gone up against 2 wrestlers in his entire career. Those are Derek Brunson, who honestly is the only true wrestler he's fought. The other is Robert Whittaker. In this high-stakes fight, going from fighting Brunson and Whittaker, the guy who Khamzat absolutely smashed in the first round, to fighting Khamzat Chimaev himself is going to be a very different level for Dricus. He's never fought someone who shoots takedowns and grapples the way Khamzat does. Not even close. Khamzat is a chain wrestler with supreme top control and excellent submissions. How is Dricus going to defend that early onslaught from Khamzat Chimaev? First and second round Khamzat is a nightmare to handle. There's something to be said about the first round takedown from Khamzat. Nobody's ever defended it. Whittaker, who has excellent takedown defense, could not stop that takedown. Kamaru Usman could not stop the chain wrestling from the takedown. Li Jingliang, Kevin Holland. With Gilbert Burns, Khamzat really wasn't trying to wrestle the same way, so it's different. Against Dricus, he's absolutely trying to take the fight to the ground and destroy him. Not only has no one stopped that takedown, but every single one of them has either been submitted in the first round or had to defend some type of choke from Khamzat. Whether it was the rear naked choke against Kamaru Usman or Li Jingliang, the face crank against Whittaker, or the Darce choke against Kevin Holland. Every fighter has had a difficult time on stopping Khamzat from what he does best.
So the Weasle makes a lot of incredible points right there. A lot of points that I bring up and I feel like everybody ignores it. A lot of DDP fans. I'm a fan of DDP, by the way, just to say, but like, the argument is usually DDP is too tough. He's too strong. It's not really looking at the stylistic matchup or the strengths of Khamzat and how DDP is going to counteract them. So he brings up some really good points about virtually nobody being able to stop the takedown. Now, the thing I will say is people are saying, yes, DDP is going to get taken down, but he's going to survive. And that's going to be Khamzat's undoing. Khamzat's going to shoot his shot, shoot his load in the first and second rounds. And then DDP is going to be able to win in rounds 3, 4, and 5. Anyways, these are what I think like a lot of DDP supporters are saying. But in particular, I think that the Weasle makes some really good points, specifically not just about his takedowns, but about his submission threats, his chain wrestling, things that Dricus in all honesty, has not really had to deal with. Maybe Derek Brunson would be the closest, but you're going to see in this breakdown as Weasle goes through this further that it's really going to be a completely different level that he has to deal with. And then when you see a lot of the things that DDP does, or at least used to do, maybe he's resolved a lot of these issues and fixed a lot of these vulnerabilities, they won't be an issue anymore. But if we're seeing some, even just some, a handful of these vulnerabilities still existing against Khamzat, is probably going to be, it could spell trouble for DDP. So now we're going to move on to Brunson, in which again happened in 2023 when this fight went down. So we're going to go through all these different points. So one of the first points he makes is in regards to Dricus's position and posture and how this can leave him extremely vulnerable to Khamzat's fighting style.
With Dricus' strength and his awkward style, can he be the one that counters this dominant first round from Khamzat? Well, let's look at some of these fights here. Against Derek Brunson, the best wrestler Dricus has ever fought. Now, generally, you don't want to be throwing kicks at a wrestler, but Dricus doesn't care about that. He fights by his own rules, and he will throw kicks at the wrestler, which he did against Derek Brunson. In fact, multiple times in the fight. Double roundhouse kick, starting with the right. The left kick was especially telegraphed. Brunson caught the kick and took the fight to the ground as Dricus tried to roll and escape out of it. All Brunson did was just sit on top, and it put Dricus in the position where he's under Brunson, fighting for his own takedown in order for him to stand up. Not necessarily for himself to take the fight to the ground, but on his way up, Brunson did a very good job of countering this by pulling his hips away and throwing in that right underhook. Dricus wasn't paying attention to his position when he was trying to stand up. And once he gets to a single knee, that's when Brunson uses that left overhook and right underhook to tip Dricus to the side, muscling him to the ground and holding top position inside control.
All right, so again, you see a lack of awareness, if you will, about his position and posturing in that spot, and that allowed Derek to flip him and get the takedown. So if these types of things are still going to exist, I think Khamzat is levels above Derek Brunson, even though he's an amazing wrestler. And plus, with the additional submission threats, it's going to be a totally different ball game against Khamzat Chimaev. All right, moving on to the next point. DDP tends to give up his neck a lot. This is, again, something that the Weasle pointed out in the Derek Brunson fight. So check this out, and we'll see what the Weasle has to say.
Whenever he's taken to the ground, he likes to shrimp into his opponent, hip escaping and rising into an underhook, using that to stand up, giving up his neck. You're going to see him do that multiple times throughout different fights. And that could be countered by Khamzat's Darce choke or Bravo choke, both of which he's used against Kevin Holland. And no one Dricus has fought is skilled with a Darce or Bravo, right? The Bravo choke would be putting his arm under the arm on the right side and then around the neck. The Darce choke is the opposite. It'll go from the neck following through under the arm. So it's essentially going from zero.
All right, so those are the two chokes that Weasle says Khamzat is especially proficient at, the Darce and the Bravo. And the way that DDP, at least historically in that fight anyways, has fought, that's going to leave him vulnerable to Khamzat's best weapons. And who knows what other submissions he's been working on in the meantime. All right, next, this is a mistake that Derek Brunson made in this fight that Khamzat definitely will not do, which is jumping a guillotine and then eventually landing on his back. That's what Derek Brunson did. So Weasle points this out. And this is potentially one of the reasons why Derek Brunson wasn't able to get the victory in this fight. Check this out.
Stand up with his right hand. Then Brunson does something that Khamzat would never do. He jumps the guillotine, goes on his back. Dricus easily pulls his head out of it. Now, there's multiple moves here that Khamzat would have done better than Brunson. Firstly, he would not be pulling a guillotine and getting on his back. In fact, I think that's a dead move in MMA now. Usually gets the guy throwing the submission into a worse position. If you're going for a guillotine, keep it standing, go for a high elbow. Pulling the guillotine to the ground is way too risky, and fighters these days are so good at defending against it, it's not even worth it. Khamzat would not do that. I think in this position right here, where Dricus is posting his right hand to the ground as he's standing up, Khamzat would have thrown a Darce choke right there. The same submission he beat Kevin Holland with. The Darce choke is especially effective here because it goes for the submission around the neck, but also keeps top position on the opponent from standing up. You could pull them to the mat, acting like a headlock, or the fighter can roll with it, returning the fight to the ground. So that's another thing I think Khamzat would do better here. And most likely, Khamzat's not going to just lay on top of Dricus without advancing position and throwing more ground and pound shots. Now, of course, Dricus could just hold him and stall it out, but Khamzat's always making an effort to advance his position on the ground to the most dominant that he can possibly get. And I think he'll do the same.
He makes a lot of really good points. If you watch the DDP fight versus Brunson, again, rewatch that first round and just think about what Khamzat brings to the table compared to Derek Brunson. It becomes pretty evident pretty quickly that it would be a totally different ball game once Khamzat is able to get him onto the ground. He's going to keep him guessing with lots of different submission threats. He's going to be hitting him heavy with a lot of ground and pound. He did that against Robert Whittaker. He did that against Kamaru Usman. So for all these different various reasons, I think it will spell trouble. Now, of course, there's been 2 years that have passed, more than 2 years since the Derek Brunson fight. So have a lot of improvements been made? Have a lot of these vulnerabilities been cleared up or cleaned up? I don't know. It's possible, but it seems that there are some gaps perhaps in the way that DDP historically has fought somebody like Derek Brunson, a wrestler, that could leave him quite exposed against Khamzat. All right, moving on. Khamzat will get DDP's back. This is another point. And I think even folks that are picking DDP, I'm pretty sure Mighty Mouse is picking him. I think a lot of people are picking him. They are all saying that, look, what we have to admit, even if we think DDP is going to weather the storm and get the victory in the long term, Khamzat's going to take him down. That's almost something that you have to accept. MMA Guru, who's picking DDP, has also said that we must accept that reality. And I think Weasle takes it one step further by showing, at least given the way that the Brunson fight went, that Khamzat will eventually get DDP's back. And if and when he does, it's going to spell a lot of trouble.
Well, actually, the only thing that was stopping him was his own left arm. He could have let go of it, throw the quick hook in there, go for the neck to get Dricus to focus and defend against the choke instead of the hooks. Something that Khamzat most likely would have done there. It would have been a lot easier, better position without the effort of what Brunson does next. So instead of going for both the hooks, Brunson lets go of a single hook, throws his legs up in the air, and with momentum, cradles Dricus by grabbing onto that leg and rolling him to the ground. Very high level move from Brunson, but it only put him in the same position that they originally were at. So it's an effective move, but it wasn't that efficient. It was a very high effort, high level move just to get into the same position that they were, because he didn't go for both hooks, right? For Khamzat, he wouldn't need to do that. He would never need to go for some move like that because he would have gotten the back in that.
So right in that position, that's the Weasel's take. He would get the back, and I think it's going to happen as well. How the fight will go from there, I guess we don't know 100%, and we shall see, and that's the beauty of the fight game. Well, I want to reemphasize too, by the way, that what makes this fight incredible, even though I am obviously on the side of picking Khamzat, there's so much controversy about who's going to win. And there's so many people. If you saw James Lynch's video not too long ago, there was like 19 people, fighters I'm talking about, picking DDP versus 18 picking Khamzat. And that's what makes it so exciting, is there's a lot of rich debate around how this fight's going to go, who's going to win, how they're going to win, etc. Like I said, best fight, in my opinion, of the decade, because of not only how good both of these guys are, but because of the fact that it seems to be such a interesting and difficult to predict matchup. All right, now we're going to move on to another point that the Weasel makes, which is DDP's. I'm not saying all his takedown. I don't think he's saying all his takedowns are sloppy, but he's showing an example of a sloppy takedown that leads to him falling into a bad position. And then he talks about, well, right, this was against Derek Brunson, but what would have happened if this was somebody at that same level of Khamzat? It would have definitely spelled disaster. Check this out.
So Brunson's rushing forward, throwing punches the way he usually does, rushing the opponent with all of his power. And Dricus shoots a counter takedown against all that aggression, and you think it would actually work. But he just didn't have enough power to throw it forward and counter the momentum of Brunson. So when he shoots a takedown, Brunson topples over him, with Dricus essentially taking himself to the ground and putting himself into full mount under Derek Brunson. That would be a game over move if he ever does this against Khamzat. If Khamzat's rushing forward with punches and Dricus tries to shoot a counter takedown against him, it put him in one of the worst positions possible. Fight is over. Not only full mount, but his arm is under Brunson too. He can only defend himself with one arm, but Dricus goes to defend himself the way he can best, and that is to give up his back. He has to. There's no way he's going to be sitting under Brunson, defending ground and pound with one arm. He needs to move and rotate and roll around, whatever he can do, and see if the position gets any better. So he gives up his back, and Brunson doesn't even flow with him at all. He doesn't throw in the left hook. His left leg is just out there. In this very position, Khamzat would be looking to get both hooks in, get the back, and choke him out. So there's already been like 2 or 3 positions like this where Khamzat could have potentially go for a finish, if not.
So he's pointing out a lot of almost like sloppiness or mistakes or things like that, that DDP has committed these mistakes in the past. But if you were to do it against Khamzat, it would be a totally different story. I mean, We can also, to be fair, obviously the Weasle doesn't touch on this in this video, but to be fair, you could also say on the flip side, maybe if Khamzat does wear down, like we have seen a little bit in the third round against like Kamaru Usman, Gilbert Burns, things like that, then DDP will also take advantage of that. My counter argument to that, again, take it with a grain of salt. I am coming from a slightly biased perspective because I do actually believe that Khamzat will get the victory. And I do believe that the purported issues of his cardio are overblown. I think that he was pacing himself in those fights for a 3-round fight. I think he would pace himself differently. I think to some extent for a 5-round fight. I'm not saying he's not going to go out and try and get the finish early. I still think he will. But after that fact, I think he'll be more conservative with his output if it does go into the deeper rounds. I don't think he's just going to be like a dead fish in rounds 4 and 5. I think like so many people are predicting, which I just don't believe, not with his phenomenal coaching staff and likely his training that's leading up to the fight, etc. I actually think though, you're going to be surprised if it does go into the later rounds, you're going to be surprised with Khamzat's cardio, but I do predict a first round finish. All right, moving on. Another issue that he points out is, the Weasle points out, is telegraphed kicks, which even leads somebody like Darren Till, who's basically a Muay Thai fighter, to go in and get the trip and get on top of DDP. So you can imagine what that can mean for somebody like Khamzat. But again, check this out. Listen to the Weasle talk about these telegraphed kicks.
On the ground. So then Dricus throws another telegraph kick. Now, Darren Till is not a wrestler, but he is a Muay Thai striker. And if you throw telegraph kicks against Muay Thai strikers, they will also grab onto the kick and trip you to the ground. So Darren Till still has that same instinct, just like a lot of other Muay Thai fighters. Throw a telegraph kick is going to knock you to the ground. So he pushes at Dricus, gets on top, and Dricus is using that one butterfly hook to elevate Till. But Till establishes top position, throwing ground and pound shots, crushes the guard with an elbow, gets around to the side, and starts throwing a flurry of punches, which gets Dricus shrimping into him again. The same thing he usually does, but this time he's attacking the single leg to stand up with. This most likely is not going to work too well against Khamzat. Well, firstly, Khamzat doesn't usually give the position for fighters to do that, but even if he did, Khamzat would most likely totally sprawl out. As you can see here, Dricus only has one arm around one leg. That's not enough to stop the sprawl. He'll need both of his arms to grab onto it. But Darren Till is focused on causing damage with his striking, landing ground and pound shots. Khamzat wouldn't be doing the same thing. Khamzat would be looking to get the position first, then land ground and pound shots and go for submission.
So there you go. In that, if this is still happening against Khamzat, where he can see these kicks coming, and then we know this with wrestlers in general. If you throw kicks, it's a dangerous play because it can lead to them grabbing the leg and securing a takedown. So it's another potential vulnerability. Now, will DDP clean this up and not throw such telegraphed obvious kicks? We shall see. But I think the Weasle makes an interesting point. All right, we get to the last point. Khamzat will attack the legs, unlike, and now this is in reference to Robert Whittaker when he fought Robert Whittaker in 2023. So he's going to make the distinction between Robert Whittaker, who's not really, like, he started in karate, so he's not a wrestler hardcore like Khamzat, wrestling his entire life, being Swedish national champ and all these other things. But still, Whittaker does successfully land a takedown, but then Whittaker doesn't do something that Khamzat almost certainly will. Listen to the Weasle explain it. Check this out.
For Whittaker, they both throw a jab, but Whittaker ducks his head under as he mixes it in with a blast double leg, taking Dricus off of his feet, blasting him all the way next to the fence. And Dricus try to counter with a butterfly hook, try to flip Whittaker, but Whittaker settles into side control. So Dricus defends the position from there by getting double wrist control, throwing a knee shield in between him and Whittaker, and has 1 foot against the fence if he needs to kick off it. So he has like a multi-layered defense here to see what Whittaker does, but Whittaker's just sitting on top, posturing over Dricus. And Dricus lets go of all defenses, shrimps into Whittaker to rise with that left underhook, just like he usually does, and that most likely is going to get countered by Khamzat Chimaev. Whittaker pivots to the side, grabs around the body, and tries to stand over him so he can't stand up. But the difference there between Whittaker and Khamzat is Khamzat will be attacking the legs, not just the upper body. It's very similar to Khabib and Islam. They'll attack the legs as well as the upper body. You can see Whittaker here. He's only standing up while trying to keep upper body control. And that's not going to stop Dricus from standing up. Khamzat would be entangling the leg, would be wrist riding, pushing his body weight on top so Dricus can't just muscle his way to his feet, keeping the position and micromanaging for the next transition to inflict.
I mean, when you watch all that back to back and you just see all the things that DDP has tried to do when dealing with some sort of a wrestling threat, Derek Brunson was probably the biggest wrestling threat. And then you see the Weasle go down and break down all of those methods of defense, shrimping into the body, exposing the neck, and just talking about how Khamzat would be a completely different beast and how he would take advantage of this tactic this way, that way, the other way. I don't know. I think unless you're just a totally blinded by DDP and everything that he represents fan, dyed in the wool fan, that you're not willing to listen to anything else. I think this has got to be interesting food for thought, and has got to give people a moment to pause to think, man, I think the likely outcome is Khamzat gets it done, but we shall see. The fight is going to go down. That's the beauty of this fight. And we got two undefeated fighters in the UFC. That is, Dricus has lost before, but he's undefeated in the UFC. Khamzat is undefeated overall. They're finally going to meet August 16th. Who will emerge victorious? I'm telling you guys, this is the most excited I've ever been for a fight ever. As my entire time as a UFC fan, I cannot wait. Let's go. We're going to have lots of videos teeing up this incredible matchup and this credible historic fight. I cannot wait. UFC 319. Let's go. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you agree or disagree with the Weasle's take? And lastly, do you also agree that this is the biggest fight of the decade? Even bigger. Okay, this is a crazy take, but even bigger than if John Jones would have fought Tom Aspinall. I care about this fight more than any other fight. So we shall see. Thank you guys so much for joining. We'll see you in the next video. Take it easy.